Welcome back to another season 2 of Flipping Tables. We are so happy and excited to start this new season again with Youth Pastor Fernando, with our special guest, Kenya, and me, your boy Javi. Today we're going to be talking about finding your calling. We can get deep with this one, but we're just going to be touching on 2 points, right? Your calling versus your, if we say it in Spanish, privilegio, right? Your privilege or the area that you serve in.
The service,
right? So calling versus your service, and also how your gifts or your skills do not define your calling.
Yep. Right. To kind of jump into it, right? I've always said that it's very important to understand and know the difference between you serving and what God is calling you to do, right? And the example that I've always given when it comes to myself was that when I first came to church and I started serving in church, it was through worship team. Right. And it was through singing. And mind you, I didn't even start singing. I started with learning how to play the saxophone. And I learned it by playing by ear, just like figuring it out. To this day, I still got to work on my skills. I don't know my skills, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that that was getting my foot in the door.
Yeah.
Once I felt comfortable serving, then I jumped into worship, like singing. And what led me to scripture and diving into scripture and teaching, and now, being a youth pastor, was my desire to be a lead worshiper. So it's like singing and telling people, having people always tell you, "Oh, you sound so good, bro. I love your voice. I love how you sing." That it's great and it gets to you, but sometimes it can become a distraction.
Right.
To the point where it's pushing you to go in a direction that maybe God doesn't want you to go. Maybe that's not what he's calling you to do. You know? And for me, it was a hard realization that wasn't for me. Or again, not to take it away, right? Because it's important to understand that the gifts that God gives you, they're yours. Yeah. No one can take them from you. They're your gifts. But your gift doesn't necessarily define where God wants you to really put in work. And for me, I remember that when I made the decision to leave the worship team and to just kind of pursue what I wanted to do, which was to dive into scripture and to teach and to serve in the youth ministry, that's when, weeks into it, I was like, oh, snap. Like, I miss it. Like, I miss it. Like, I feel like, yes, I left it, and I feel like I'm in my element. I'm doing my thing in this, but I really miss worship, And I was sharing with you guys earlier that, like, when I've had folks saying, "So when are you coming back? So when are you doing it again? When's the next run?" It's like, I wasn't thinking about it. But in my heart, I'm like, ooh, but I kind of want to. But again, where does the Lord want me?
Yeah.
Is the opportunity going to present itself? I think one day it will. Maybe I'll lead worship one day. Because that was, I know that God loves me, and he's always giving me the desires of my heart. So maybe one day I will get an opportunity to lead worship, But the reality is that, should I chase that? Is that God's plan, or is that just my plan?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, I'm in the mindset of, like, I want to serve, and I want to do what's right for his kingdom and not so much for what I want in life anymore. At this point, it's like, it's my relationship with God, my wife, my family, my work, and then my ministry. And it's like, those are my 4 priorities. And I've struggled to kind of align myself with God's plan that he had for me. But scripture says, the plans that he has for us are better than the plans that we can come up for ourselves. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, for me, I've chosen to follow what he's calling me to do. But sometimes I feel like that's the difficult part, because both routes seem to be the right ones. It's like, there's nothing wrong with just singing. But is there something that God wants more?
Yeah.
Can you multiply the gifts that he's given you to the point where he can use you in different places? To me, I feel like, yes, there's always a lot more. But if you have the will, he will give you the way.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. Well, for me, at least when I was 9 years old, God came to me and he showed me my purpose. He showed me my calling, right? But I was too afraid, and the enemy saw that because I was confused. I was 9 years old, right? I didn't have any guidance, no one to tell me, hey, what God is telling you is your calling. I didn't know that in that moment. So it's good to also highlight and to mention that service, even though sometimes we serve and that's not our calling, it's important. It's a very important aspect. And I want to encourage also our youth, when especially when you're done with high school and you have the ability to decide what you do with your own time, a little bit more like room, right? Some of them don't really have that much, but some do. And I want to say that service is important because it also keeps you aligned, right? It also keeps you on check.
Yep.
It keeps you like from sinning,
Huge,
because I remember when I was serving, I would be like, nah, I gotta serve on Sunday, like I can't be sinning this Saturday,
Yeah, I can't sin. I
Move
can't
out.
sin this week.
But I was young, and dumb. And so I'd be saying things like that. But in reality, God was really like protecting me, And in my part, I started 14 serving with the kids and being a teacher. And from that, I hated it. I was like, I was forced into it. I remember Hermano William, God bless you, brother. He's a pastor now. And he'd be chasing me around the church. Like, I had crazy moments at church, but he'd be chasing me around and he'd be like, hey, Kenya, come here. You have to serve today. And I'm like, I'd be like running away from him, And then he would grab me. He'd be like, go to Salacuna and go serve over there. I'm here trying to hide from him, right? And then Mano Nestor, I became a teacher to my brothers, my siblings, and I hated it because they were so bad. And then it kept on going, And I was just like, I'm not meant to be a teacher, especially young kids.
Yeah.
Especially teens, and they're so annoying. So when the moment where I was like, this is not for me, is when Hermano Frank gave me his class, and Willie was there, my brother was there, a bunch of kids that age. They had to be the worst class, I think. And I think I got to their level, which was really low. And I was like, oh yeah, you want this? And then I was just like, you know what I mean, right?
For no reason.
And I was just fighting them for no reason, right? And then I told Hermano Frank, I quit, And then I fell in love with worship, but I couldn't sing, right? And so a little testimony, I bought Singing for Dummies. So
That's putting it nice. It's actually Singing for Idiots. That's the name of the book.
That's right. So I started watching it, preparing, and then I went for to practice, which was at Pastor Nestor's house. And I showed up for months. And then this guy decided to show up with me. And then I always knew, like, a lot of people go through like a few months or even a year before they start like singing or playing.
Yeah, serving. Yeah.
This guy shows up within a month. He was on the list to serve. I was so sad, bitter, and resentful. And I was just
salty.
like super salty. I was just like, why, Lord? And then the Lord knew why. But he saw like how much I wanted it, right? And little by little, I started learning how to sing. I still working on it, but he's still good with me. And so, but there was a moment where like prophecy came back. And I was just like, we're not doing it, Lord. Unless you take over me and my mouth. And that was one time he did that. And it was like, I hate to say it this way, but it was like almost like I couldn't stop it. Like a vomit. Like it was just, and then I was, and it wasn't me. It was something that, but because I challenged, I said, Lord, if you want to use me, you better use me. Like, go ahead, just use my body. But then I approached Pastor, and I Pastor Nestor, and I said, Pastor, this and this is happening. He said, write it down. And you know what, Kenya? You have to have faith when you prophesy.
Yeah.
You have to have faith. And I realized that I was lacking faith. And in the moment, I started searching more of the Lord, just like Fernando, and preparing for this. And I'm not gonna lie, I was scared. I was scared because I was still struggling with what happened to me as a child. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna be used in the prophetic way. And then last year, on December 2022, February last year, I'm sorry.
Okay. 2023.
2023, Pastor and Erica calls us, and I'm going to practice for worship. And then Fernando, I say, hey, Fern, come with me. And then Fernando comes with me after years of not coming to our worship because he had already quit worship. And he comes with me and to a practice, and he's working. He's always working. And he's like there. And then Mana Erica sees us, and she's like, oh my God, Fernando, you're here. I didn't even know you were here. And then that's when they talked to us. They took us to el cuartito, the little room. And then they mentioned, they said, we feel in our heart for you guys to lead the youth. And I am like going like this. And Fernando's going like, and I'm just like, I'm not going back to those teens. I'm not going back to those kids, But I had already worked with Carlos, which is the previous youth pastor. And it was a different thing working with him. It was just a support, know. But this time I just felt like I wasn't worthy. I felt like, like I was not capable. I wasn't, and I said it. I cried on my way home, and I said, Fernando, we really need to think about this. It felt like heavy to me, and I said, I am not capable of doing this. And he was like, yeah, if anyone is capable, Kenya, it's you, blah blah blah. He was selling
Very
me.
encouraging. Yeah.
And then
He was selling.
I said, okay, you know what? I removed myself from the spiritual aspect, and I just said, okay, I'm going to work for the Lord. I'm going to give 110% and blah, 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 blah. And I just focus on the logistics and the things and the preparation and all that stuff, right? And then Agape showed up, our first conference, and then I received a word. And it's crazy because I'm going to testify this, and I'm going to, again, being vulnerable, right? We were going to be vulnerable. We're on our way because we had a special meeting with our guests for Agape on a Monday. And I'm on my way, and I'm fighting with Fernando on 200, right? We're only 10 minutes away from the church, and I'm crying. And out of nowhere, I'm like, I don't even know where I'm going to this meeting. I don't even know where I'm youth leader. And we had just finished a very successful conference. It has been so good. God spoke to our youth, to me. I think we all received so much from that day. And I don't know where this is coming out of me, right? And I'm saying, and I know I'm not qualified for this. And I'm tearing. Like my makeup is like disappearing. And I'm bawling. And Fernando tells me, and he's like, he's in the parking lot. He parks and he's like, he grabs my hand and he said, if you want to quit today, we quit today. But we're not, I don't want to see you this way. And he says, you want to go home? We'll go home too. And something that I said, I was like, I'm not quitter. I'm not a quitter. I'm not quitting. But the real thing that was happening was like, no, this is not me. This is not me. What's happening? Who's saying this, right? So I get to inside the church. I go check my makeup. I don't see Fernando. And then I see one of my friends, and I'm mad at Fernando, right? So I want to go sit with her, but then she's sitting with her husband. So I'm like, oh, that's weird. So then Fernando's like, and I'm like, why is he sitting all the way in the front row, like with next to Hermana Erika, right? And I'm just like, hi, pretending like nothing is happening, but everybody can see my eyes. And then all of a sudden, like something inside of me say, I'm going to talk to you tonight. So I open my phone and I press the voice recording and I put it down. And then Emmanuel Len Ballinger comes and he says, you have said that you're not qualified. And he just starts saying everything I have just said in the car.
My God, almost word for word. It was intense.
Fernando and I were like holding hands, shaking and sobbing because God is right there. And I'm just like,
yeah.
If that moment, the fear of God, right? Like, I was like, I don't even want to open my eyes because you're right there, right?
Yeah.
And I could not feel more loved. I want to share this. I want to say loved and say, I picked you. I've chosen you, and you're going to do things to glorify my name. Hey, I am your humble service. Do your will. In that moment, like, God sealed me. God said, and one of the things I want to say is that he sees your willingness. He sees your desire, and he sees also, like you said, he will put it, but he also sees, he sees the wanting to say, I'm going to give you only the best. Only the best in whatever you're doing. And then he's going to put your calling in that moment. Oh, trust me. And the things didn't end there. We still struggle after that, right? But I realized, and then he said, this is your calling. And then he told me, he gave me a prophecy, and you will be peacemaker, right? me calling me peacemaker. But you know who are the peacemakers? Are the children of God, right? And I'm thinking like all of these thoughts that all the words that God has given me, and I'm thinking, wow, I am that mother because he called me mother of many. And I'm like, I have become that mother. And I have also, he called me like an olive tree. And one of the things that I research on olive trees is that they're big, they're rooted deep, and they can last for thousands of years, you know, and they bear fruit, you know, and so I'm like, this is it. This is the calling. The one that my heart did not desire,
Right.
you know, the one that I hasta belittle. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it was a crazy turn because now I have fallen in love with it and I don't see myself without it, you know. And even worship has become second place to
Yeah.
me, you know.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
still do my best. I'm taking singing lessons, you know. But one of the things I want to say is always give your best because God sees that and he says, "Huh, I see him. I see her always giving so much. How about we establish the calling here because of them?"
Yeah. I like that you said, that you shared that because, I mean, we all have a calling. We all
Absolutely.
have a calling, um, and it's not. I mean, like he also gives us the gifts to be able to, how can I say, like mature in that calling, or he enables us to grow in that calling, right? But it's not always in the area that you're serving in. We all served in worship. Everybody knows that. I've been serving in worship since I was 11.
Yep.
On the drums. They mention all the time, like, oh, when Javi first started playing, like you couldn't even see him
It's
behind
true.
the drums, And I wasn't like, oh, I want to be the drummer. I want to be the church drummer. It was just I love drumming. And then all of a sudden they were like, hey, you're up.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, like let's get it.
Mhm.
But I also got a word, because I feel like that's how your calling is. Like, first God is going to tell you, right? And he might not always be like 100% upfront
Yeah.
and clear with what you're going to do, right? But like I got a word at 16, 15 or 16. And then I got another word, a similar word, about a year later. And then I'm trying to dissect it. Like, what does it mean? Right? All he said is, I'm going to make you fall in love with my word. And at that point I'm like, I don't even read the Bible. I'm only opening my Bible at the Bible study. I'm not even reading the daily Bible verse. So what do you mean I'm going to fall in love with your word? And then I start thinking about it and I'm like, okay, if I'm going to fall in love with his word, that means I'm going to understand it. For what? To keep it to myself? No. If you know his word, what are you doing with it?
Yep.
So then I'm like, now I start negotiating with God. Straight up. I'm being real. And I told this to Pastor too. And I started telling God, like, I'm not going to be a pastor. I'm not. Because I know the commitment, the level. If you're a pastor, like, that's a different level. And I was like, I'm 16, 17. I'm like, nah, I'm good. I'm still listening to secular music. I'm still cussing. So I'm like, God, like, I can't give up this artist, or I can't give up this genre of music. It goes hard. Like, I can't, and but little by little, it's a process, right? And I start telling God, you know what, God, like, fine, not a pastor, maybe a youth leader. I'll do youth leader. I'll slide by with the youth leader. And now I'm negotiating with him, right? But he's like, I'm still drumming. I'm still doing the drumming thing, right? But I felt like he also gave me a gift to speak to people. I don't get shy. I don't get stage fright. Like, I get stand up in front of 100 people, 10 people, 1,000 people, and not get stage fright.
Wow.
And I can, elaborate. I might not have the best vocabulary, but I also know how to explain things to people and break it down and
Right.
try to relate. So I feel like, all right, God, like, you're giving me this gift. You already promised me this. It's for a reason. Like, now it's starting to click. Now it's starting to add up. And then finally, like, once I started getting in it, you know, and then the opportunity came when you were like, hey, you know, I think because of these characteristics, you might fit with this in this
I
area,
love
right? In
that.
this team.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, God, you know what? Like, I'm down to try it. You know, I was a little, I don't want to say scared, but I was a little hesitant in the sense of like, man, nah, I really gotta commit, you know? Because if I'm gonna be teaching, I gotta know what I'm teaching.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I gotta be able to live what I'm reading, right? What I'm teaching, because it needs to hit me first.
Right.
Right. So, again, God tells you you're calling. God calls you, right? He called his disciples. He called the prophets. Like, I didn't get to say, well, God, you know what? I want to be a teacher. I want, you know, no, it didn't start like that. He called me.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times if we are wondering, you know, especially if you're younger, and you might be wondering, like, God is going to tell you,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
right? You just got to be listening.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be listening and be aware and try to understand like what the calling is
And ask him.
and ask him. Because
Ask
at the
him.
end of the day, like, it's not just one. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you might start off as a teacher, but who knows if you're going to end up as a youth pastor or even a pastor.
Yep.
And then you're also an evangelist.
Yep.
Right. And then God could use you in prophecy.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're a prophet. And, you know, so it's like, man, like, it's not just like one thing.
It's just
It
levels
can
to
be
it.
different. Yeah. Different
And
levels.
I think I like how we all had a different approach to
Mhm.
it, right? Because sometimes people say like, well, how come I don't get it just like Javi said, where God announces it? Or how come Kenya went through a whole struggle of like having to let go of so
Yeah.
much? And I like, and to me, I see like how Peter had his own process
Mm.
where he had to deny Jesus,
Mm.
right? He denied him and he had to be
Restored.
restored in that sense, right? But then you also have Saul, who was completely blinded, and then he had to go through a different restoration purpose of having to understand that he was just on the wrong team. My man switched jerseys, and all of a sudden he became the foundation of what we're now being reached as the Gentiles, right? So it's like everyone is going to have a different process to it. And one thing that I've been feeling in my heart for a while now that I wanted to share was that sometimes we tend to fall in love with just the idea of certain things. You know, I see it a lot in youth nowadays where everyone's like, oh, yeah, I want to play football. I want to play basketball. I want to do this. I want to do this. I have so many.
Oh, even I want to preach. I want to
like,
be a pastor.
You don't see a whole lot of preachers, you know, kids wanting
But
to be
lately,
preachers.
no, lately that's a thing now.
What I'm saying is like the point I was trying to make is that the kids fall in love with the title,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but when you start talking about the process, they're like, oh snap, like that's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I want to practice 6 days a week for 2 hours every day. That's a lot. What about just 1 hour? And they start negotiating with themselves of how they're going to get there, you know. And it's like, you don't go pro unless you think like a pro, you practice like a pro, you plan like a pro. Like that's how you get to the pro level, right? If you're just going to be mediocre at doing your grades, that means you're going to be mediocre everything else you do. That means that when you get to the next level, you're going to be mediocre college guy. And then when you get out of college, you're going to get a mediocre job with a mediocre income in a mediocre house. Like, everything's going to be mediocre because that's what you're aiming for, right? So it's like, and that's just on the secular side, right? But when it comes to the spiritual aspect of it, it's like, if you want to just be a member of the church, it's a piece of paper. You just sign it up and fill it out and give it in, and you're a member.
You just show up.
Yeah, you just show up on the weekends and you do bench warming. But do you want to be a bench warmer or do you want to be a starter?
Yeah.
Because to be a starter, you have to push hard. You know, you can't just stop halfway and be like, oh, well, you know, I'm just on the bench this corner, this game. It's like you have to have it in you to want to be a starter. Where's my position? That's my place.
Yeah.
And I'm going to own it, and I'm going to practice, and I'm going to work hard to always stay in my position so the next guy up doesn't take my spot.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you have that desire to do something because you love what you're being called to do, nothing gets in your way.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you never get too tired.
You
don't get overwhelmed.
Yeah. And like what you said, it was good because you have to work for that, you know, and it's not about a position. It's not about a title, right? We got to be very careful about like working for a title. I want to be a pastor because I want people to call me a pastor. We have to be very careful with that. the other thing, like you were touching about it earlier about serving, how serving keeps you accountable. Because that was my mentality too. Like I'm serving, and all through high school, I'm
stay
like,
out of trouble.
yeah, I'm like, I can't slip up with this girl. I can't go,
Yeah.
I can't, sneak off after school or skip school and go do this because I have to serve Friday.
Service will sanctify you.
I was like, I gotta be good this week. You know what I mean? Because I can't get up there and be dirty spiritually.
You know what the
Right,
crazy part
right.
is? Like, you guys are saying it and we're laughing about it, but the truth of the matter is, like, when you think about like,
But there's
the
consequences
instructions-
about it.
But when the instructions that were given to Moses about the tabernacle, right? It says these tools that you're going to use, like they're going to go through a process, and once they go through that process, they are used for nothing but.
And even the
just
priests had to be sanctified.
So
He had a process.
the word that we're looking for is consecration.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
you have to consecrate these things. These are left only for that use, and you don't touch them. So you guys joke about it and we laugh about it, but the truth of the matter is that, yeah, like we do that, and it keeps you on point. It keeps you on your toes. But the reality is that it's because you're meant to be only for that use.
Yeah.
You're not meant to be dirty.
I think it's important to serve. I encourage everyone to serve. I encourage everyone to serve with all their heart. I encourage everyone to commit. I encourage everyone to go with the mentality that this is going to be hard. This is going to be something that is going to take a lot of your time, a lot of your, even like things that you love to do. For example, sleep, right? We're in worship and some of us have to get up super early, and be there all day. I don't know you, but I come home and I crash. I am exhausted from Sundays. And there's a lot of things that sometimes I don't want to go to practice, but I have to because it's required out of me. And I think that it's important. I think it's important. I think I heard once someone said, "El que no sirve, no sirve."
Wow.
So
harsh.
can someone translate that for me, please?
But if you don't serve, you're not useful.
Yeah, and in Spanish
Pretty
it makes sense, but I think that it's important. I want to encourage everyone to serve, to start serving, and even if it's something that you guys don't have your calling clearly, it's gonna come in that way.
Yeah.
Because I think about David, right? He used to be in the green pastures con las ovejitas and playing his harp and then God called him to do that. His skills to go and rebuke demons from King Saul, and in that moment, he didn't realize. Well, he was already
anointed king.
Anointed as a king, but what I'm trying to say is before that, it's like he never even crossed his mind that his true calling was to be the king that God has chosen to lead Israel.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that, but think about David, he's the perfect example of the process, right? To get to that calling. He didn't immediately become a king.
Yeah.
He had to go through a process. And some people will go through a process. I feel like I went through a process and where God wanted to take things away from me to prepare me for my true calling, right? Some people won't go through that process. Not everything is going to be the same. I love that you said that because not everything is going to be the same. Like you, I feel like God has been straightforward with you. But a lot has to do with men's heart. If your heart is not willing, it's hard, or there's a lot of things that you haven't let go, God wants you to let go.
Right.
And the main thing is that I want to encourage people is to start serving because God will start showing you where you belong.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think the more you serve, not to be like, spread yourself out too thin where all you're doing is like
you're burning out.
Yeah, you're burning yourself out, right? But like to really like serve, and I think this is one thing we were talking about at one of our meetings. It was like if you can only serve in this one area, give 100% in that area. Right? Like if the only thing you're doing is welcoming people, and even then you're doing it half-hearted. I'm sorry, like I'm very like exigente. I demand a lot because I know myself. Right? So
are we.
I'm like I'm very demanding. So it's like I'm sorry, like if you're gonna be like that, I don't want you. You're like, that's what we're on the team. Yeah. It's like I don't want you because if I'm saying like if you're only serving here, like just give me 100% in that
Yeah.
one area, you know, and
Little
God,
smile in there.
yeah,
a
be
firm
friendly,
handshake,
like
yeah,
you know,
be
be ready,
welcoming.
be joyful, you know, in whatever area, right? Like I mean, I think about again my calling versus where I serve. I mean, I'm a teacher too, but like I serve on the drums still. But I knew, you know, 10 years ago, I was like, I don't want to be 45, 50, 60 still playing the drums. Like, I don't want to be that guy.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know you guys talked about a grieving process or
Yeah.
for you to talk, right? I don't know if I'm going to go through that, but I might. I don't know, you know, because I love playing the drums.
Yeah.
I'm passionate about it. But I also know, like, sometimes your focus has to shift. And I feel like it's already starting to shift where I care more about the ministry on the teaching side
Yeah.
than I do on the worship team. I still love it, but if God
You're
is
still
like,
responsible.
yeah, if God is like, hey, if this is what you have,
Yeah.
you know, this is where I want you, I'm going, you know, because it's like I finally accepted it. You know, I finally accepted the calling that he had for me. And so I think it's important to realize like we have to give 100% and encourage people to serve too, even when they start young. I mean,
Yeah.
I shared this with somebody on over the weekend at a round table we had. I was like, man, I was born in church.
Yeah.
I saw on my dad's side, on my mom's side, everybody was serving. My grandmas, my my
Wow.
aunts, my
That's a
uncles, they were
blessing.
serving. My mom, my dad. So all I knew was if I'm going to church, I'm going to serve.
Yeah.
I'm not going to church to warm up a seat, and that's no shot at nobody. But I'm not just a church goer.
Yeah.
I go to serve. If I'm at church, I'm serving. So I encourage people because that's gonna hold you accountable. That's gonna start forcing you to
Yeah.
live the right way.
And I think Jesus left the best example out there,
Right.
right? Jesus started serving as when he was little, you
Mhm.
know, and then even when he got lost, and his parents asked him, "Where were you?" And I was with doing my
At my
father's
father's house.
work, you know, and at my father's house. So the thing is, like, I think that it's a perfect example. You know, he worked really hard. I told Fernando we'll sleep later. Like, you know, obviously
We slept yesterday.
you know, we slept last week, so
Yeah, so
we'll
we're
be
good.
fine.
We're
But
good.
not really. Take care of your sleep, but
Right.
take care of yourself. Go work out and exercise and eat
Eat
well.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, you have to be in order to know your calling. Let's talk about steps about how to prepare for your calling, Barry. I think one of the things is that we need to start praying to ask God to show us how to align to His plan, right? I'm pretty sure you have plans in your life, preparations, things, goals, you know. So we do as well. And you know, we wanted to buy a house and a lot of things last year, which the year before and all that stuff. But crazy enough, when we bought this house right now, where we're recording this, is that I said to the Lord, I'm opening my door
Mm-hmm.
to anyone you want to bring in here. This is your house,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And you know, yeah, it's cute, it's pretty. I just renovated my kitchen and my living room, and yeah, I don't want people to mess
The
my
floors,
world floor
yeah.
or nothing. But you know what? That doesn't matter because this is your house. You can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And God sees that, right? And I'm like, I want to align with your plan. And keep in mind, nothing about leading was in sight, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the Lord was already changing my heart, preparing my heart, and changing my vision because I was already asking Him,
Right.
I want to align with your plan.
Right.
And that's something He put in my heart and said, you know, like I started praying with that, you know, so God, show me what you have for me. I don't want to keep doing plans for myself. I don't
Right.
want to. One of the main things is that I started thinking about this is because of Tiago, right? I started having so much anxiety about his future. Who's gonna take care of him? What's gonna happen when I die? What's gonna happen when Fernando dies? How his life's gonna be, right? And God, even right now, we just received the greatest news ever, and things about him that we're like in awe.
Yeah.
How God is like aligning everything
Wow.
and showing His glory, right? So one of the things that I think is we need to know how to pray, know how to come to Him, and get ready What are things like, I don't know, you guys have prepared and gotten ready for this calling?
I think it's going to be a little bit different for different people.
Mhm.
And just like I said, for guys like Saul,
Mm-hmm.
he already knew what he wanted to do. The only difference is he had a veil that hadn't been taken off his face, so he couldn't see the actual truth, right, of what it was. For Peter, Peter had a different approach to everything as well, because he went through a process where he wanted to do right, but when confronted, failed miserably. And God was so good that restored him again, right? For me, I think I feel like I can align myself with the idea that I knew that I wanted to do something more, and I was seeking him and his presence, his word. I was seeking that, you know. When I started feeling it in my heart what he was calling me to do, I was open-minded to it, and I felt him putting that will in me to pursue that, but also the he was equipping me
Mhm.
to do it as well.
Mhm.
Now, it did take work, right? Because I remember like when I first started doing it, even my wife would be like, "Oh, you're putting that before us. You're doing this. You're doing the most." Like that was her approach to everything. And I was like,
Everything with balance, guys. Everything with
exactly.
balance.
So like in the back of my head, I was like, God, how do I balance this? You know, because I want her to know that she comes
Absolutely,
first.
yeah.
You know, like I want her to know and feel it, not just verbally, but to like to
Yeah. To
know
know.
it's for it to be evident, you
Mhm.
know. But at the same time, God, like this is I love this. This is what I want, and I'm falling in love with your word, and I want to continue to seek
Right.
that. Right. So like finding that balance, I think the most important thing that you have to do is the moment that you feel that you understand what the calling is. I think it's important for you to say, okay, for me to get from point A to Z, there's certain milestones, there's certain levels, and then you break down the plan. I've heard this, and I'm pretty sure everyone has in the world too, like where they say that dreams are only dreams until you put it down on paper, because once you put it down on paper, now it's a plan. You know, now it's a goal that you have in mind. Now, once you take that goal and you start breaking it up into steps, now you actually have a plan. Once you start breaking those goals or those deadlines into smaller pieces, now you can go ahead and apply those into your calendar,
Mhm.
and now you have steps. You know what I'm saying? But like you have to know what the goal is or your destination, and then you can plug it in. But first you have to understand where you stand and where you want to go. Kind of like your GPS in your vehicle,
Yeah.
right? The first thing that it does is starts measuring where you're at, getting your location.
Location.
And it's okay, well, these are the different routes that you can take. This is going to be the fast one. This one's the scenic route, right? And the other one's like, hey, this one can go, but it has tolls.
Yeah.
So
Now,
they to add.
pay for
if you're gonna hit those tolls, you're gonna have to pay for it. You know what I'm saying? Like that's how it goes, right? So sometimes you have to take the long path so that you can avoid the tolls, but you have to be patient, and it requires more. So again, to summarize, what I'm saying is, it's important to know where you stand and where you want to get, and then you have to plan accordingly. If you're purposeful in what you want to do, you're gonna plan accordingly.
No, and the thing is, like, for example, if we going back to when I said I don't qualify for this. I don't just stay there and say, okay, Lord, now you do a miracle
Yeah.
and qualify me. But now I have to start taking action, and believing, because part of being believers is putting our faith into action, right? And we talk about that in a previous podcast. But it's like, okay, so now I have a calling. He says, I am the one
Yeah.
for this job. What do I need to do next?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that when one of the things I want to say is when that happens, you start going forward, and you start equipping yourself. And I'm gonna say something, right, that it's not gonna be very pleasant, but that's when the enemy starts seeing your potential too. And that's when the enemy's like, she's going for it.
Yeah.
She's doing what she's supposed to be doing. Oh no, she's waking up at 5 in the morning again.
Yep.
Oh no, she's actually reading the Bible, not the devotional. Like,
Yeah.
And guess what? That's when now you have to be stronger, because now the enemy saying, not just God saw your potential, but he is now.
Right. Right.
And then I didn't realize it. And then all these things started coming, and I just started getting ugly with God. And I started saying, I need your help. I need you this. I want you to help me. I really want to do it this way. I really want to be like 100% with you. And honestly, like that's the best way to be.
I like how you say that because at the end of the day, kind of like in sports, right?
Mhm.
When you know they have a playmaker on the other team, what the defense will start doing? They start planning just how to isolate that person, how
The
how
details
to
on
how to
that
take
person,
that
yeah.
person out. You know. So at the end of the day, it's like you said, the enemy sees your potential. He's like, oh snap, I got to start game planning against them.
Right.
Mhm.
You know. But the important thing is, if you're a baller, you're pushing,
Mhm.
and you're gonna find ways to get around
Mhm.
whatever the plan might be that he's putting up against you.
Exactly.
Mhm.
That I mean that truly reminds me of Saul, because when Saul was pursuing Christians and killing Christians and doing all this stuff, he thought that he was doing the right thing.
Mhm.
Why? Because he was passionate about what he was doing, you know. And the way that I see is like when they flipped the switch on Paul from Saul to Paul, he continued to be the same person. He didn't change up. He didn't switch up
Mhm.
on who he was, right? But God used his passion, used who he was to build up the church. You know
Towards
what I'm
the
saying?
truth.
So it's like all he did, like I mentioned earlier, all he did is switch teams,
Right.
and all of a sudden it went from tearing something down to completely building it up.
Mhm.
You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? So it's like just like I saw her, God used all the skills and abilities and the gifts that she's received, that she does on a daily basis here in this
Mhm.
house.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, he said, well, now you can apply it to ministry. She starts doubting herself. And it's like, no, you did everything like just exactly how I expected you to do. You have more to give than you believe you
Mhm.
have,
Mhm.
you know? And at that point, that's when God starts to really act and use you. And all the weaknesses that we may have, that's when God starts to really show through
Yeah.
all of your weaknesses as strengths.
Yeah. I like that you said that because at the end of the day, you talked about equipping yourself, preparing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot, that goes into that we can save for the next
For the next
episode.
one.
Yeah.
That should be good too. So we're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna leave it there. We appreciate you guys always sticking with us, and
Yep.
welcome to season dos of
Ready for
Flipping
it.
Tables. And we hope that you guys like, comment, subscribe, and share with a friend.
Absolutely.
We hope to see you guys on the next one.
And don't forget, hit that notification button, because that way you can always know when we're dropping new content for you guys. We're excited for what we have for you guys.
Let's get it.